This is Thames Television. The Thames News follows the world news now from ITN at 10.
Death Ferry sails in tonight. Passengers still smell sewage. Bush invokes the Old Pals Act to save his presidency. Bosnians and Serbs clash at Human Rights Conference. Tip-off cracked IRA bomb cell, more suspects held. And the children for whom crime has become the future. Good evening. The Celtic Pride ferry set sail again today, only 24 hours after 2 children died, apparently after breathing in sewage fumes. And passengers getting off at Swansea tonight told ITN there were still sewage smells on board. The ferry had been allowed back to sea after Irish investigators called it a 1 in a million accident. Also today, previous passengers on the Celtic Pride said they had complained about a strong sewage smell during their journeys weeks ago. And the Irish government alerted other countries to the risks of a similar tragedy.
The Celtic Pride docked in Swansea tonight at the end of its first crossing since the death of the 2 child passengers. It was allowed to sail by Irish authorities who continue to blame the deaths on unusual circumstances, including bad weather. But ITN has learned that the ship's log contains passenger complaints about an overwhelming stench of sewage even on smooth crossings, and that the company has admitted problems with blocked pipes. One passenger heard gurgling noises from her cabin lavatory.
It was just foul. It was a real sewage smell.
The Brenman family complained following an April crossing. The stench from the bathroom was worse than a sewer, and they said a crew member told them the cause was a blocked pipe in the waste system. The company reply admitted the Brenmans were right and told them blockages can occur which cause smells within the cabins. The Brenmans said today they were shocked by the deaths.
Extreme anger, because frankly we'd reported it to them. They knew that there was some kind of fault in the plumbing or sewage system there.
The 20-year-old Celtic Pride relies on a gravity sewage system, unlike the more efficient vacuum system favoured by all other ferries on the Irish route. The Tomlin children, whose funeral takes place tomorrow, were asphyxiated. For the toxic levels in their cabin to be so high, experts believe there may have been an accumulation of faults. First, the water in the U-bend was either lowered or displaced sufficiently to allow toxic gases to escape. But the strong build-up suggests a flap valve from the settling tank where gases circulate may also have been open, and that waste vents to release gas could also have been partially blocked.
We think that the sewage piping on the ship will require some additional modifications to enable the piping to ventilate itself easier than it's doing at the moment.
Tonight, the ferry company said that all complaints had been investigated.
All of them were logged, and all of them were investigated. There had been talks in the press and in the media of noxious gases. They are quite unfounded to say that sort of thing.
But passengers coming off tonight were still complaining.
Just the sewage smell. Just, I can't explain it, you know.
The Celtic Pride is Polish-owned and Polish-run. Modifications will have to be agreed with the Polish authorities.
In the clearest admission yet that he's in deep political trouble, President Bush did what was widely predicted today and put his longtime friend, Secretary of State James Baker, in charge of his re-election campaign. Mr. Baker will become White House Chief of Staff. It's generally conceded that he has the magic touch in American politics. He salvaged Mr. Bush's faltering campaign in 1988. Now, with the president more than 20 points adrift in the opinion polls, he must do it again. For 3 years, Mr. Baker had the pivotal role in shaping American foreign policy. But the president's pressing problems now are on the domestic agenda.
President Bush is in trouble. Today's move, the clearest signal that he now believes he's in danger of losing the White House.
I've asked Secretary Baker to resign as Secretary of State, to join me as Chief of Staff and Senior Counselor to the President.
Baker will take over a campaign in chaos and direct a candidate 30 points behind in the polls. A candidate and a friend.
But I do want to say a word about my friend. He's the sort of man you want on your team.
Having cried help, he didn't want to take questions and scurried out after his announcement. James Baker, his own eye on the presidency in 4 years' time, took the cheers of his staff. He said it had been one of the most difficult decisions of his life to rejoin the White House. His endorsement of Mr. Bush was hardly ringing.
And I know what he can accomplish when he directs his resolve toward a purpose.
Baker has guided Bush for 35 years and seldom lost. He's already been Chief of Staff to Ronald Reagan and helped Reagan and Bush to 3 landslide victories. Today, he faces a different kind of slide.
He brings success to a campaign that appears to be in free fall. He's got to come in and stop that. He has to bring morale to the troops.
It's a critical moment.
36 years with one power in party. One party.
Mr. Bush isn't getting his message across. In its place, questions.
Have you ever had an affair?
12 weeks to the election, and the Bush camp is fighting allegations of womanizing.
I don't know the person who wrote the book, but they ought to have their mouth washed out with soap.
Barbara Bush may well be her husband's best asset. Dan Quayle isn't, and James Baker's dislike of him is well known. But Mr. Bush is insisting Dan Quayle stays. The Democrats today called the Baker move a sign of weakness.
Bush and Quayle are in a state of political panic, and they're throwing everything, including the kitchen sink.
But they know James Baker and a successful convention for Mr. Bush next week could herald a famous comeback. James Baker has managed a presidential comeback campaign before, in 1980, when President Ford, like President Bush, was 30 points behind in the polls. But in the end, Ford lost. Mr. Baker will need all the skills he's learned in the Middle East to rescue George Bush in the Midwest and everywhere else this time round. Bill Neely, News at 10, Washington.
Red Cross inspectors who've been into detention camps in the former Yugoslavia say all sides are using systematic brutality. 12 they visited in the last month violated the Geneva Convention. America said it wants a United Nations investigator to start compiling evidence of human rights abuses. Other countries at an emergency meeting of the UN Human Rights Commission in Geneva are likely to support the idea in a vote tomorrow. Ian Williams of ITN's Channel 4 News reports.
They are ushered into the canteen for their single meal of the day.
ITN's pictures of suffering in Serb-controlled detention centres in northern Bosnia provided the catalyst and the urgency for today's meeting, though many gathering in Geneva had not seen the full news report, which was screened by the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. Today's meeting of the 53-nation UN Human Rights Commission is the first time in its history that the Commission has met in emergency session. They usually meet once a year to draw up a list of the world's worst human rights violators, and they do not have a reputation for either speed or bite.
We ask the people of Serbia and Montenegro this simple question. Do they wish to go down in history as the last fascist state in Europe?
Mr. Bolton urged the Commission to appoint a special, powerful rapporteur to conduct an urgent investigation into abuses and for those responsible to be brought to justice.
Mr. Chairman,
Yugoslavia accused the meeting of being one-sided and threw back the fascist allegation at the United States. Away from the meeting, the International Red Cross said that in spite of the outcry against the camps, it was still being offered only limited access and had not received comprehensive lists of detainees.
There are deep breaches of this international law during all this conflict, and especially about the civilians detained in these places of detention. They are subjected to inhumane treatment, and that's unacceptable for us.
The Human Rights Commission continues its meeting tomorrow and seems certain to adopt the tough American resolution. The question then, can it match words with actions? Ian Williams, News at 10, Geneva.
The United Nations Security Council is tonight on the verge of agreeing that troops could be sent to Bosnia to protect food sent to the hungry people. But the Secretary-General, Dr. Boutros Ghali, said he was worried UN troops could be in danger, depending upon how that resolution was implemented. Kevin Dunn is in New York. Kevin, evidence there of a split, perhaps, between the Secretary-General and the Security Council.
I think, Alistair, there is certainly a difference of opinion between the Secretary-General and the Council, and in particular between the resolution's sponsors, that's Britain and the United States in particular. Mr. Boutros Ghali is known to be concerned that while Bosnia is getting all the world's attention, a country like Somalia is disintegrating without anything like the same attention being paid to it. He is also very concerned about the safety of UN troops already in the region, and he doesn't want more blue-helmeted troops coming under fire.
But at the end of the day, under the new order, doesn't Dr. Boutros Ghali just have to do what he's told by his political masters?
Well, the Security Council is almost certain to go ahead in the next hour or so and vote these resolutions through. The question then is whether these will be implemented. And Britain and the United States are known to want to be seen to be doing something, but they privately hope that the mere threat of force will be sufficient to bring Serbian authorities round and that they won't actually have to commit ground troops in the end.
If they're not that lucky, what are your sources telling you will be the trigger point for the troops to go in, and when?
I think the trigger point would be any further attacks on UN personnel attempting to deliver relief supplies. The sources at the Security Council stress again to me tonight that the troops, if they are sent, are not peacekeeping troops, they're not peacemaking troops. They would be there only to protect the UN relief operation. And it would be any further attack by either side on that UN operation which would trigger movement.
Kevin, thanks.
The bus convoy of children from Sarajevo arrived safely in Split on the Croatian coast tonight. 300 had made the journey out of the Bosnian capital along dangerous roads overlooked by Serbian snipers. They were tired, but happy to be safe after 24 hours on board the buses. In Sarajevo, the killing goes on. An American journalist, David Kaplan, who worked for ABC television, was shot dead. He was hit by snipers firing in a convoy carrying Mr. Milan Panic, the Prime Minister of what's left of Yugoslavia. Also in Sarajevo today, the Foreign Minister, Mr. Douglas Hogg.
Foreign Minister Douglas Hogg learning the grim facts of life in Sarajevo, where the only safe way to travel is in an armoured vehicle. A few minutes before Mr. Hogg left the airport in a UN convoy, an American journalist in an unprotected car was shot dead on the same route. The British minister had talks with Bosnia's Muslim president, Alija Izetbegovic. The UN votes tonight on a resolution sanctioning any force necessary to get humanitarian aid through. But the British minister said he'd made it clear there would be no direct military intervention to stop the killing.
I explained very clearly to them that there was no cavalry over the hill. There is no international force coming to stop this. That being so, in the absence of discussions and a ceasefire, the killing will go on, and I made that very plain to the President, and I believe he understood it.
The minister spent time with UN relief workers, assessing the flow of humanitarian aid and the need for more outside help to get food and medicine to those who need it. Another visitor to Sarajevo airport was Milan Panic, the Serbian Prime Minister of what's left of Yugoslavia.
They just came, I told you, for one single purpose, to make sure the road, airport, and the new road is open. New road is Sarajevo-Belgrade.
Since the airport reopened at the weekend, more than 20 planes a day have been bringing in essential supplies, but it simply is not enough. The problem is each of these Mercy flights brings in just 3 pallets full of food. That's enough to save the city from starvation, but it's not enough to feed the people properly. The Mercy flights need the backup of land convoys to prevent more suffering. But one UN estimate says 100,000 troops would be needed to secure any land corridor from the Adriatic coast into the city. Paul Davis, News at 10, Sarajevo.
Kevin Dunn's just been able to let us know from New York that the Security Council has indeed voted 12-0 to implement the resolutions on protecting convoys of food supplies in Bosnia. We hope to have more of that later on in this bulletin. Here, a tip-off from a member of the public led to the police swoop that foiled an attempted IRA car bombing in London's West End. The person became suspicious about someone wanting to buy a van for cash. What followed was a secret police operation over several weeks, leading to the seizure of large quantities of explosives and bomb-making equipment and several arrests.
The police raids on 3 addresses in the London area followed a secret anti-terrorist operation that began more than a month ago. They were watching this house in Southall, West London, another in nearby Hanwell, and a flat in Cheshunt in Hertfordshire. Those addresses and a number of vehicles were kept under surveillance around the clock as a result of information from security sources in Northern Ireland. The police say all the vehicles have been seized, along with a large quantity of homemade explosives. It was a member of the public who alerted police after he became suspicious when someone tried to buy a van for cash. Although Scotland Yard isn't saying just how much explosive has been seized, they want to keep the IRA guessing, it is being described as a substantial haul. It's believed the amount could be anywhere between 2 and 12 tons. This investigation began after the bomb that destroyed the Baltic Exchange in the City of London in April. That was around 1 ton of explosives. The quantity seized in this operation could have caused far greater devastation and loss of life. This was the first major success since MI5 took over responsibility from Scotland Yard for anti-terrorist intelligence gathering on the mainland. Only last month, RUC Chief Constable Sir Hugh Annesley had called for closer cooperation between the various intelligence and police agencies. It seems to have paid off. Tonight, several suspects, believed to be at least 3 men and 2 women, are being questioned at the top security Paddington Green police station. With the operation still ongoing, more arrests could follow. And Scotland Yard is warning the IRA may try to strike back and is urging the public to report anything suspicious. Glenn O'Glaser, News at 10 at New Scotland Yard.
From the raw statistics of Britain's burgeoning crime figures, a new and disturbing trend has emerged. More and more offenders are mere children. The police and judges say they're powerless to deal with them. The 10 and 11-year-olds who see crime as the future. A special report in Part 2. Plus, a new job centre is opened, 27,000 more jobs go. And checking the bag checkers to keep the airline bombers at bay. That's in a couple of minutes.
South Yorkshire Police said today they caught a gang of teenagers, one only 14 years of age, driving along the M1 at 120 miles an hour with no lights on. Police say it's another example of the increasing seriousness of crimes committed by the very young. An Old Bailey judge and a chief constable complained recently about not being able to lock up violent and dangerous children, some who repeatedly reoffend. David Chater has been hearing what happens to the kids society cannot control.
Well, I think it's quite a horrible place because I don't like it. I like my freedom. I like to roam around. I don't like to be kept in. They don't let you go out on your own.
You've been out on your own though, haven't you?
Yeah, I just go AWOL. They can't stop me.
The Aycliffe Centre houses some of Britain's most disturbed children, some as young as 10, robbers, arsonists, even killers. The secure unit inside the centre is the last resort, where the children who simply cannot be controlled are kept under lock and key. This 10-year-old is just starting a 3-month stretch.
Why am I here?
Why are you being locked up?
For running away from home and that, and having problems at home, and like pinching from shops and pinching cars and burglary.
Outside the secure unit, though, there's little to stop the children running away from the so-called open accommodation blocks. Last year, there were no less than 1,800 separate attempts to abscond from here. The staff, it presents a difficult dilemma. They try and build a relationship with the children and then find themselves having to physically restrain them in wrist locks.
They were saying, you cannot touch us. This is my right. I chose to say, well, I'm sorry, you're 11. And I wouldn't be able, I'm not happy with myself leaving an 11-year-old to leave my care in just pyjama bottoms after 10 o'clock at night.
So if they do make a decision to secure you...
The National Association for Young People in Care says such restraint is an abuse of the children's rights. The whole regime of control, they say, is the wrong approach.
The one option that's available for them is to get out to the place, to get away from it, and to get away from those adults. They have big problems with adults. Adults are usually the people who've abused them for most of the time up until coming into Aycliffe.
Discipline is not a word they use at Aycliffe. They say their first job is to manage unacceptable behaviour by children. In some cases, that can't be done without locking them up. The director of the centre calls them children from the margin of society. Children who've been left behind by society, and their numbers are on the increase.
I have a child of 11 who is very bright, very lovely in all sorts of ways, but who by the age of 11 has 2 blocks of ice for his eyes because bright as he is, he recognizes at the age of 11 that he doesn't have a snowball's chance because of what has been done to him, because of the way he's been brought up, because of the circumstances in which he has grown up. He has grown to loathe, to detest humanity.
There's a report coming in of the lads actually trying to break into the pub.
It's the police who have to deal with the problem on the ground every night. Offences committed by a hard core of children too young to be tackled by the criminal system. They end up back on the streets, offending time and again.
All we can do at the moment is to arrest them and rearrest them. That absorbs and saps our resources day in, day out. Increasingly, frustration is caused amongst the public and amongst my own officers here. We have to do something more positive to sort this problem out.
The director of the Aycliffe Centre says it's a problem showing every sign of growing worse.
I have children here who even 5 years ago I could not have imagined existed. And that's not because of my limited imagination, but because they didn't actually exist 5 years ago. There is an increasing number of these children, and that in each of their cases their condition is worse than it was before. So they grow up with this sense of hopelessness, this sense of helplessness, this sense of really not having any investment in society.
David Chater, News at 10 in County Durham.
The unemployment total has reached a 5-year high, a national disgrace in the eyes of the TUC. The number of people out of work and claiming benefit last month was 2,753,000, a seasonally adjusted rise of 29,000.
Another month, another rise, another government scheme. Employment Secretary Gillian Shepherd visited a new job centre today. She launched a drive to get more employers to notify vacancies to centres like this one. But critics say the government's in a panic to prevent unemployment reaching 3 million. Mrs Shepherd denied there was a crisis.
Half of the people who become unemployed get back to work, you know, within 3 months, 2/3 within 6 months. And with the help that we can also give them, there is no need to regard it as a crisis.
Britain's unemployed now form part of a European jobless pool estimated by the Labour Party at 16 million. Labour wants the government to launch a Europe-wide initiative to tackle the problem. It said today's UK figures were disastrous, and not just for those who'd lost their jobs.
They're disastrous for all the rest of us who are taxpayers, because we have to pay an enormous price for unemployment, about £9,000 per person who's unemployed, and that amounts on these figures to £24 billion this year.
The recession has virtually eliminated regional differences in unemployment. When the latest rise began in April 1990, the rate in the South East was low, just 3.6%, while the East Midlands stood at 4.9, the North West 7.4 and Scotland 8.1. Now, though, unemployment in the South East is more than twice its 1990 rate at 9.3%, by far the largest increase. In the East Midlands it's 8.8, in the North West 10.5%, and in Scotland it's edged up only slightly to 9.4%.
Unemployment traditionally has been a much bigger problem in the north, but the south is being hit hard this time, and the unemployment level is now not really very much lower in the south than it is in the north. There's been an evening out of the misery, if you like. The north-south divide is closing.
There was some economic comfort today from manufacturing industry, but not much. Factory output rose slightly in June. As for unemployment, that won't start falling until well into next year at the earliest.
British Airways have come up with a new deadly kind of video game for its baggage handlers which could stop hijackings. The airline wants to keep them alert by superimposing the shapes of guns and other weapons on the X-rays of suitcases.
Operators who vet baggage on X-ray screens know any piece of luggage could contain a bomb. Yet most of them will never see a real device in their working career. Now British Airways has devised a new and easy way of testing the vigilance of these operators. Currently they test them with real devices in bags once a week. Now they're trying out a computer that superimposes an image onto the X-ray picture of a real bag on the computer screen. In this case, the image is an automatic gun pointing at an angle. If the operator spots the device and presses a button, the computer records his response. If he misses the computer-generated image, his screen warns him to be more careful in future.
Sitting at an X-ray screen for periods of time throughout a shift. They're strictly limited on the amount of time they can spend on a screen, but inevitably they spend several periods each shift. And to project the odd image for them to find makes it more interesting.
But the new system won't spot baggage containing Semtex explosives, which terrorists used at Lockerbie, and won't help counter the threat of unaccompanied bags in transit from flight to flight.
The trouble is, though, that X-ray equipment can't detect the type of bomb that caused Lockerbie, and for that reason, as British Airways well know, it is necessary to identify which suitcases have not got passengers with them, and until they're able to do that reliably, it's likely that unaccompanied suitcases will continue as at present to be loaded onto aircraft.
Whatever the limitations, everyone agrees the new system will help to keep operators on their toes. Lawrence McGinty, News at 10, Heathrow.
Tonight's main news again. While we've been on the air, the United Nations has voted to authorise the use of military force, if necessary, to deliver humanitarian assistance in Bosnia.
And that's it from both of us. A very good night to you.